Hello everyone. So what we've got going on here is a little closed transfer. I've got a Munich Helles in there, which I've brewed under pressure using L17 harvest yeast. It's just going into the keg down there. And this video is going to be about testing how good these pressure fermented lagers can really be by putting it into a proper BJCP competition and getting some feedback on it. So I'll talk a little bit about the beer and then see how it does in the competition. Let's get into it. Right then, so here we have the finished beer. And as you can see, it's looking pretty good in the glass. We've got really nice clarity on there, a good firm foamy white head on the top, and a decent bit of carbonation streaming up the glass too. So this beer is actually getting judged tomorrow. The competition is on Saturday, tomorrow. This has been in the keg for 3 weeks, so it's a bit young still, and at the end of the day you can't really get around the fact that a bit of lagering is going to improve any beer like this. I would have liked to have lagered it properly for at least sort of 5-6 weeks ideally, but I brewed the beer a little bit too late. So obviously I was brewing under pressure because I wanted to see how a pressure fermented beer would do, but I still think that those beers will benefit from a bit of lagering afterwards, obviously. So pressure fermenting, I think, gives you a bit of a head start in terms of that conditioning phase, but it's not going to completely undo the need for a bit of lagering to really sort of smooth out the final product. But we'll see. I'll give it a little taste test and see what I think, and obviously hopefully we'll get to see what the judges think from the competition as well. So I shamelessly nicked this recipe off of Andrew Lynch. Go and check out his channel. I'll put a link to the video for this beer above, and I've been sent John Pollock's version of this beer to try, and I thought that was so good that I'd brew this one myself for the competition. So I won't put the full recipe up, but it is in the link in the description to the brew file, the recipe, and it's basically floor malted Pilsner and a little bit of Munich and a touch of melanoidin malt in the grist. Then we've got some Saaz and Hersbrucker in the hop schedule. Saaz is a little bit unusual, but it's the bittering hop, so it's not going to have as much of an effect on the flavour. And then the yeast, as I mentioned at the start, is Imperial L17 Harvest, and there has been no intervention with this beer in terms of the clarity of it. So there's no extra finings post fermentation added to it, no gelatin or anything like that. So the clarity is really all down to the yeast, basically, in a good cold crash. And yeah, like I said, it's clear as a bell. So I'm really happy with how quickly that has dropped clear. And I think the yeast is really good flavour wise as well. It does give you a nice clean, crisp, but quite malty sort of flavour from the beer too. So head's dropping away a little bit now, but it's still maintaining a decent head on the top. Let's give it a little bit of a test run, and then obviously after tomorrow, hopefully I'll get some results back for this and we'll see how it does. So aroma wise, the first thing that hits you is definitely a kind of sweet, kind of cracker bread malt. Definitely smells like a kind of traditional German lager, which is good. And then there's just a little bit of a hint of the sort of floral, slightly spicy hops in the background. It smells good. It does smell good. So aroma is a thumbs up from me so far. I'm not a qualified judge in any sense of the word. All I would say is I guess I've been brewing for long enough and tried enough beers and tried enough home brews particularly to probably be able to identify quite a few off flavours, because I've certainly created enough of them myself over the years. So hopefully I'll be able to recognise if there's anything obviously wrong with it, but as to whether I can judge if it's, fitting the style properly, maybe not so much. But anyway, let's give it a go. So flavour wise, it tastes good. First of all, to me, I'm really happy with this beer. I don't get any obvious off flavours with it, so I would hope that the score sheet comes back without any major flaws on there. Sweet malt up front, a little bit of spice from the hops. There's enough bitterness there for it not to be kind of really that malt sweetness not to kind of carry through, so that it actually finishes sweet. So it is dry at the end, but you definitely get this kind of lingering kind of malty flavour from it, which, having read the style guidelines, I think that does kind of fit quite well. And there's a nice balance to it. Now, I would say this might be the fact that it is quite young playing on my mind, but I would say that it's the hops are maybe a little bit more present on the flavour than what I would expect with a Helles. And obviously that's something that can kind of smooth out over time. It's not that it's overly bitter, but the bitterness is maybe a touch more prominent than I would expect. And there's a decent amount of hop flavour there. It's by no means a hop bomb, but I do get quite a bit of that sort of spicy floral flavour from the hops following on from the malt. So I'll be interested to see if it gets picked up by the judges in that sense. So you could say it was pushing slightly the style guidelines in terms of the level of hop flavour on it for me. But I think there is a little bit of allowance made in those for fresher examples of the style to have more prominent flavours in some aspects of the overall taste. So yeah, I really like it. Personally, I think it does fit the style quite well, although being really fresh, perhaps some of those flavours are a little bit more prominent than the guidelines would suggest. So maybe another few weeks in lagering would benefit it. But I think I'd be quite surprised if this comes in certainly less than 30 points. So generally, in my experience, if your beer doesn't have any big flaws with it, then you're going to score sort of over 30. Low to mid 30s, I think I would be reasonably happy with. If it does any better than that, then that's great. But I'm going to finish the rest of this off, and I will come back to this video once I've got an actual score sheet to go through. So fingers crossed, and see you shortly. So it's the day after the competition, and the results are in. Thanks to the really well organised people behind Lager Than Life, all the score sheets and everything have been published as well. So I've got all my feedback, I've got the score, and well done to those guys for putting on a great competition. And like I said, getting all of that information out to the competitors really quickly. So I think that really is appreciated by everyone who enters these sorts of competitions. So let's cut to the chase. How did this beer actually do? Well, it scored 35 out of 50. So if we put that into an out of 10 score, 7 out of 10, which is pretty respectable. It didn't place, which you wouldn't really expect to get a place usually with a score in the mid 30s, but I'm still really happy with that. And that is pretty much where I think I was saying that I was expecting the score to fall somewhere. I said in the low to mid 30s. So I think my assessment of the beer was reasonably close. There were a few things mentioned by the judges that I didn't pick up on. So they both did mention a hint of acetaldehyde in there. So that's the green apple kind of flavour that you can get as a byproduct of the yeast not performing quite as well as it could have done. That could well be down to the beer not actually being on the yeast for that long. So even though pressure fermentation will help to drive off those sort of byproducts, I think it still is a good idea to have the beer on the yeast for long enough for it to clear up things like acetaldehyde, and at a bit of a warmer temperature as well, I think is helpful with that. So it did come off the yeast fairly quickly, and that might have been responsible for that. But it was mentioned as a very subtle thing, and to be honest, I can't be that sensitive to acetaldehyde because I definitely don't really pick it up on the aroma, and I never got any kind of green apple flavours off of it either. But both judges picked up on it, so we'll assume that like I said, that I'm maybe not that sensitive to that particular flavour, which can happen. Other than that, again, when I was talking about the beer and tasting, I said that I thought the hop flavour and bitterness might be a little bit too high for style, and one of the judges did pick out that particularly, and also mentioned that maybe it would have been more appropriate in a style such as Heller's Bock, which is a bit of a stronger, more bitter or slightly more bitter version of a Heller's, basically. So, but other than that, like I said, 35 does actually literally put it into the category of very good. So it's in that score range, and I'm happy with that. So some good points to work on for the feedback. And ultimately, as far as pressure fermented beers, I think it does show that pressure fermented lagers can certainly stand up under judging and be competitive. There's maybe a few things with the recipe for this that could be changed as well. So perhaps dropping the bitterness down a little bit, reducing the hopping rate maybe, and just giving it a bit more time through the whole process. So obviously the pressure fermentation can speed things up, but as I said at the start, it was still done in a bit of a rush, and maybe that affected it slightly in some respects. That's not the whole story though, because I am very happy to report that the winning beer in that category that I was in, which was also a Munich Helles, was brewed by the Hop Edition podcast's very own Owen Puckett. So congratulations, Owen. And I was lucky enough to actually try Owen's winning beer last night on the podcast. So the results came out, and it just so happened that Owen had sent out the beer to all of us on the podcast, and we tasted it alongside a professional brewer, Jimmy from Unity Brewing. So the live version of that podcast is up on the Hop Edition page. You can go and check that out and see us tasting that beer, and also getting Jimmy's opinion on it as well. So we all really enjoyed it, and I think that did put into context where this beer was in terms of like fitting the style requirements, because Owen's was a little bit cleaner, a little bit lighter in sort of flavour and maybe body to an extent as well, but the hop presence was definitely a bit more subdued and restrained. And tasting mine now, it was quite clear to me that was maybe obviously it was closer to style as it's written by the BJCP. So congratulations, Owen. Well brewed beer, and we all really enjoyed drinking that last night as well. So the other thing to mention, of course, is that was also a pressure fermented beer, and Owen actually brewed that on a fairly tight schedule like I did. So more evidence that pressure fermented beers can compete and win in these sorts of competitions. Now, I'm not going to say that pressure fermenting will automatically make your beer better, but it definitely makes the process easier. It makes it quicker. It means that you can turn the beers around without locking up your sort of fermentation chamber for a long period at cooler temperatures, and it just makes it easier to avoid the kind of off flavors and things like that, which if you're inexperienced at brewing lagers can often cause you problems. So the proof is in the pudding, and my beer scored quite well. Owen's beer won the category, so you can't really argue with that. And I'll also give a shout out to our friend Luke Stevens, who also entered a beer in his very first competition, a pressure fermented lager that he came up with the recipe himself for, and that scored 40. Now, unluckily for Luke, it was in a category that was very competitive, so even though he scored 40, it didn't manage to place, but I imagine it was probably just behind the top three. And yeah, again, pressure fermented lager. So I think the results kind of speak for themselves in that very small and totally unscientific sample, but you get the idea. I think it's a really useful tool if you want to brew lagers, but you don't necessarily want to go through the rigmarole of a full length kind of traditional lager brewing schedule and all the rest of it. Pressure fermentation is definitely something that you could look at, and you can produce beers that can be as good, if not better, than beers brewed with more traditional methods, and you can certainly have them in your glass a lot faster. So I'll leave it there, and let me know in the comments what you think, and whether or not you have any opinions on this. It might be a little bit of a controversial one, but like I said, proof's in the scores, isn't it? So cheers.
I'm the dude. So that's what you call me, that or his dudeness or duder or, El Duderino if you're not into the whole brevity thing.